Hello everyone, and welcome to today's IT Expert Roundtable, Modern Collaboration with Microsoft Teams. I'm James Skate, and I'll be your host for today's session. I'm a Senior Product Marketing Manager in the Microsoft 365 team here at Microsoft. Before we get started, I'd like to invite you to submit questions through the Q&A window anytime during our conversation. I'll be on the lookout for your questions to ask our experts. In case we run out of time and can't get to all of your questions today, we'll stay behind and post them with the on-demand webinar. And if there's time at the end of our session today, the experts will share some key takeaways with you. With that, I'll let everyone take a minute to introduce themselves. Frank, we'll start with you.
Thanks, James. I'm Frank D'Elia. I'm a Senior Program Manager here working on Microsoft Teams, and I work on the Microsoft Teams client capabilities.
Hey everyone, my name is Anas Sheikh. I am a Senior Program Manager in Core Services Engineering, and I work on the upgrade to Teams.
Hi, I'm Sarah Bush. I'm also a Senior Program Manager in Core Services Engineering, and I work on Teams readiness and adoption.
And I'm David Johnson, Principal Program Manager for Strategy and Architecture for our internal tenancy of 365 within Microsoft.
Great, thank you. Let's get started with our first question. Where are we in the journey from Skype to Teams? Anas, do you want to take that one?
Yes, so our journey from Skype to Teams started a long time back, and back then, the important thing for us to create what we called a list of minimum viable product, which was a list of scenarios that we wanted to make sure exist in Teams, because these were scenarios in Skype for Business that our users were accustomed to using. It makes me really happy today to say that after about a year and all the development that has gone into the product, it has now enabled us to upgrade our users from Skype to Teams. Today, we have about 50,000 users in our company who are upgraded only to Teams. They do not use Skype for Business for chat, calling, meetings, which are the traditional things that they used to do with Skype. We also are in a state today where we are going to go ahead and upgrade the rest of our company, which starts in the month of January, and we are expecting to complete the entire company by around February or March. So next quarter is going to be really exciting.
Wow.
Yeah. And I'd say that one of the things that's been really important for us as we've thought about this journey is to really listen carefully for some of the key scenarios that are happening within the organization, so we can identify what is it beyond the core functions. What are the capabilities? What are the uses that people have for Microsoft Teams that they might have done in a different way, and how do we move forward with that? How do we provide them the right guidance and make sure that they have the capabilities they need to be successful?
That's right, and to that end, we have done a lot around readiness and adoption and training. And we've really keyed in on making sure that people understood the communications functions, because we're removing what they're used to using for communications in the form of Skype for Business. So while we've shown them how to use Teams in the many ways and the many things that you can do, we've also put a focus on that to make sure that they were ready for this transition.
And the other thing I'd add to all this is that we've enabled our employees to get a new team. Anytime you got a new project, anytime you have a new organizational reorg, go create a new team, because that is our internal best practice in terms of where a team gets its work done. So go create a new team. When you got something done, any Microsoft employee can go create a new team automatically.
Awesome. And then along the same lines, are there any gotchas or challenges that you can help share with our audience that might actually help them in their prep for Skype to Teams?
Absolutely.
Yes. So it's a very broad question, because it depends on every customer and their environment. What kinds of things do you as a customer require in your environment? We are the lucky ones, because we are the toughest, because we have everything. Every product that we've launched over the years, we are still using it, be it RGS, be it PSTN calling, be it call queues. So we had to plan everything before we started the upgrade to Teams. But the bigger ones that I would say for a customer in general, which everyone would use, would be make sure you understand how federation works. Make sure you understand how scheduling and joining meetings work in Teams. Make sure you understand how you can join a Skype for Business meeting if you upgrade to Teams, because you can still do that. those are things that I would expect, or I would suggest we plan for. If you use response groups, make sure you plan for their migration to call queues and org AA. So it depends on what you use in your environment, what's important to you, and make sure you can do all of that in Teams.
Perfect.
And sort of as a counterpoint to that planning, I kind of wish that that I had a magic wand, because if I could change one thing, it would be to reduce the amount of time where we're beginning to do our migration, and then and the duration of time to which we finish the migration. So in that time, we've got some users who are in one state, other users who are in a different state. That's been kind of complicated. We've obviously kind of had to go that road. But if there's anything I could do that would compress that time frame, I think it would just simplify things for our users.
Great point.
Well, and I think to that point, it also goes down to the idea that we're encouraging our customers to make sure that they're planning their journey very deliberately. It's not just a technology adoption, it's actually about user change management. And so the more time that you can put into like those scenarios, a lot of times I talk to customers and customers are talking about starting with one team, one group, or one department, and as they're on Skype and Teams together, taking those learnings and then being able to apply those to the next ring. And I think Microsoft internally, we've actually done a pretty good job of being slow and deliberate with the testing. But to your point, Frank, it's a matter of how do we become more efficient with that engine.
Mm-hmm. And some of it from a culture change standpoint is also about just people getting work done instead of emailing around an attachment. I can just have a chat, talk about it right there in Teams. The file's right there. It's SharePoint behind the scenes. It's all good right within the experience. I've got all the controls. I'm no longer going back and forth on some completely synchronous model where I'm waiting for this other person to do something, right?
And people like to learn in different ways. You know, we have a variety of ways for people to get that information. Very short videos that are scenario-based that show you how to do something like that quickly, up to, you know, in-person trainings where we spend some deeper time with you. So I think it's important to strategize how you're going to deliver those messages and meet people where they are, and then have a feedback mechanism to hear where they're running into bumps themselves.
Absolutely, that's super important. Okay, the next question. How have you dealt with the coexistence challenges with Skype for Business and Teams?
Yes. So it also depends again on your environment. In our case, the choice was very simple because we launched Teams about a year and a half ago where none of these coexistence scenarios existed. So the choice for us was very easy. What we went with was what we call today as the islands mode, where any user in Microsoft today has both Skype for Business and Teams, and they are welcome to use both products. Now when we do the upgrade, what we're trying to do is all users who we are upgrading to Teams go straight to upgrade to Teams. They do not have the ability to use Skype for Business for chat, calling, and meetings. They can use Teams for that, but everyone else who is still not upgraded and is going to be at some point can still use both clients, which then enables the users who are not upgraded to still interact with the upgraded users and vice versa. However, there are several other scenarios available for customers today. If they wish, those work better for them, like coexistence with meetings, coexistence Skype collab mode without meetings, Skype collab mode with meetings. You could go ahead and use those as well. So it totally depends on what makes you more comfortable. You have all the options. Don't have to follow what we did. Do what works best for you.
Well, and that's actually a great point because at Ignite this year in September, there was a specific session on Skype to Teams upgrades where those scenarios were actually fleshed out.
Right,
so it's important for for those watching actually to be aware of that as an asset, because if you're looking at implementing Skype to Teams as an example, where might you actually go to find those resources in addition to the documentation? So check out that Ignite session.
The other thing I think we did internally on the Skype to Teams migration journey was because we had Teams, to your point, rolled out earlier, even before the voice switchover, people were already getting comfortable using Teams just for the team chat conversation part of it, the team files aspect. And so we were already having teams that weren't using Skype yet for voice, just using Teams as a collaboration enabler.
It's kind of interesting because things have kind of flipped a little bit. I agree with you, David. The people who first using Teams were really using those core collaboration capabilities. For those in our environment who never really dove in or were using Teams, we now find that we have to spend extra attention to illustrate those collaboration capabilities because they may be first using Teams because of our switch, our upgrade to calling IM and meetings.
Right.
Well, along those lines, the next question that we have here is, are there any features that work in Skype that will not be available in Teams?
There may be certain things. It's difficult to answer this question right away because, again, Skype is a very different environment. It has an on-premise component. It has an online component. Things like response groups, things like location-based routing. We can do all this easily with Skype for Business on-prem. You cannot do this today with Skype for Business online. Teams, you would be able to do that, but obviously there is no response group component of Teams. There is no on-prem component of Teams. So you would be able to use call queues in comparison with response group. You would also have location-based routing, but the way it works, the way you configure it would be different because it's a different solution. However, at a very high level, we don't think that there are certain scenarios that would completely break a user's experience if they switch from Skype to Teams.
Got it. Yeah, I know that based on the question, there's a couple different aspects. You know, and also you mentioned it, like Skype for Business Online. Thinking about Teams as a replacement for Skype for Business Online is much more relevant today than it is to say for Skype for Business Server.
Yes.
And so, you know, one of the other questions that we consistently get, and I see it in the queue here, is Skype for Business going away?
Yeah. So this is the strategy of the product. Now, we are launching Skype for Business 2019, and per our policy, and I come from the support background, I still know customers who are using OCS, which means it's not easy to say that Skype for Business is going away. If you have Skype for Business server, it's your server, and you are welcome to use it. The idea that we are trying to incorporate is we make that transition from Skype to Teams easier so that 2019 Skype for Business server will have features that will allow you to transition from Skype to Teams if you wanted to, and it will make certain things which were not available previously, like cloud voicemail, org AA, using an on-prem number for dial-in conferencing. All these things would become easier if you wanted to move everything to the cloud, but had to stay on-prem for certain countries or regions where regulations might be preventing you to.
One of the other questions along those same lines actually talks about, like, what does the support model look like if I'm using Skype for Business Server on-prem today?
Support model, if you're a customer and if you need support for Skype for Business, we traditionally always have had Premier support as well as broad commercial support. So any customer who uses either Skype for Business on-prem or Skype for Business online has the ability to open a case with Microsoft, and it's very easy to do. You go to your Office 365 tenant, you create a ticket, that ticket goes to our Tier 1 or Tier 2 support. If these engineers are not able to resolve it, they get escalated to Tier 3, where the Tier 3 engineers work with you, and at any given point of time, if this issue does not get resolved, then it finally gets escalated to the product group. And that normally happens if there is a bug or a code problem, normally not a troubleshooting related. So the support system for Skype for Business is there, and it will stay the way it is.
Correct. And just to maybe elaborate or double click on that, with the introduction of Skype for Business Server 2019, with that comes a minimum of 5 years support for our customers. And so
That's
for those
great,
that are using Skype for Business Server 2019, there should be some assurance with them that, you know, at least for the next 5 years, that server will continue to be maintained.
Right.
But also to your point, the earlier versions of the server will still continue to be supported, even if it's in much more like a bug fix mode, etc.
Exactly. And per my experience in support, even if we phase out a product, even if it's no longer supported, we still provide best effort support. So we may not be able to do code changes, but we will still help you if you have a problem that needs troubleshooting.
Perfect. Awesome. It looks like we've got a ton of questions coming in, so let's go ahead and jump into the next one. A little bit more tactical. When will native shared calendars be added to Teams? Having a link to a SharePoint calendar is a workaround, but it adds overhead. Are there any thoughts or?
I've heard that that's coming, and I think I've seen some sketches and some early thoughts on that. I know lots of people within our organization are looking forward to that, just because they feel like they've jumped into Teams and want to be able to do even more without leaving that single point of reference.
That said, the Teams, because Teams is backed by the Office group, which spans the Outlook components, the calendar and Outlook, as well as a SharePoint site, there already is also inherently a calendar already for every team in the Outlook part of the team.
Perfect. So hopefully, knowing the fact that Teams is actually kind of a wrapper of Office 365 services, that there should be some assurance that that type of functionality, if it's not there today, is amenable to coming pretty soon.
Well, and I'd say the way we kind of think about it today too is because, as you say, it's a suite. We use and we encourage our employees to use all the components. And I've got Planner, for example, behind Teams. I've got SharePoint behind Teams. I've got this calendar behind Teams. So every group has all these things. You can absolutely use them with every group. And it doesn't matter to a certain degree if you're using the Teams experience for that group, or you're just directly in SharePoint, or you're directly in Outlook. No matter which of those group connected workloads you're in, you get that same benefit.
Perfect. Awesome. Let's go on to the next question. Hi, I love Microsoft Teams and I use it a lot. One thing that can help to make it more productive is if channels could be restricted to a subgroup of team members. Is that feature in the enhancement plans?
So I'd say, obviously, from a product perspective, you can say what's coming there. I think, our internal guidance today, this is an interesting one too, is it comes down to the altitude of a team and where we want people to get work done. Because we today obviously think about the altitude as a membership of the people that should be working together, because we think about it as sensitivity, how confidential the content must be, that set of people. And so as we think about the possibility for breakaway permissions effectively, consider that kind of scenario we already do today in SharePoint clearly, and other workloads where I can say, you know what, I want to restrict this file to only these people, for example. So those are all capabilities, are all technically there under the surface now, that I can go into SharePoint site if I want to restrict. The private channel conversation is really about what is the right altitude for the group itself. And so I can't really speak to the product when it's going to come and if it's going to come, but certainly it becomes a conversation of what is our strategy within our employees as to what is the right altitude for projects.
And I think too, to just say what we talk about in readiness, is that it's important to consider not only at the document level what permissions that you put on it, because those are retained through in Teams, but also if the team setup is inherently transparent and open and quick moving, and you have the option to do a one-to-one or a one-to-many chat, which includes file sharing and things of that nature, that is kept restricted to that group. So it's also another way to get information across.
Yeah, to your point, David, coming from the product marketing org, at Ignite this last year, we did announce that private channels are coming to Teams. And so we expect those to land shortly, but I wanted just to reiterate on the 2 points that you guys made. When we think about SharePoint permissions, Teams is actually enabled to create and foster transparency and collaboration. And so the idea is that we want to make sure that we're taking those permissions and we're making them as simple as possible. So, for example, any permission applied to the team applies to the entire team membership. The idea behind private channels is actually meant to be more specific to, let's say that you might be planning an event and you might be needing to restrict a team from, let's say, 100 people to 20 people, because those 20 people are either working on your keynote or working on a press release that you want to make sure stays internal or stays more restricted. So in those instances, like a private channel might be the right area or right opportunity for you to engage. And so those are the scenarios for which we're lighting up private channels, and we expect those to be generally available over the next coming months, and so you'll likely see those pretty soon.
That's a good point, because I think one of the things I know, David, you and I have talked about is what is the kind of guidance that's appropriate to give for these scenarios? Because one of the concerns would be that, like you're saying, it's used in areas where maybe I'm not sure, but then when I'm trading off, when I choose to sort of limit my audience, I'm trading off that openness, which is one of the hallmark advantages. So I'm glad you brought that up. It's something we're going to have to make sure we do our homework on.
Yeah, and I'd say this also goes back to, if you're already using SharePoint today, even before Teams or with Teams, also understanding the inherent, when are those opportunities to break away permissions on the SharePoint site, and understanding and thinking through when is that the right thing to do from a strategy perspective. That's probably going to be the same strategy for when you want a private channel, because again, we want to think about that whole set for the team working together.
Perfect. Along those same lines, the next question. Right now, Teams is leveraging SharePoint behind the scenes to host files, but creates a SharePoint just for that team and channel. there any plans to tie Teams to SharePoint sites created outside of Teams?
Great question. So one of the things, I'll take that one. One of the things we do today is, in fact, you can take an existing SharePoint site, and depending on your tenancy, one of the things we've rolled out is a groupify concept to take an existing classic SharePoint site and connect it to an Office 365 group. So step one, get a group connected, so it's now a modern SharePoint site with a modern homepage, and group connected, so back to the same Office 365 group membership. Next step is there's a Teamify button on SharePoint directly, which then I can take that group connected SharePoint site now and add Teams to it. So yes, you can absolutely, and one of the things that I know is rolling out over Rings now is that ability to groupify and then Teamify an existing SharePoint site.
Perfect. And that actually goes, there was another question with clients that have elaborate SharePoint sites with specific permissions. How do you suggest moving these files into the new teams that have been created? And so you just actually elaborated on that.
Yeah, when I say there's something to think about that though, is it also goes back to the permissions management conversation of, look, if I have a really nested SharePoint site with lots of complexity and hierarchy, bringing that in does require some thought, because your team boundary now in Teams is the membership. Your boundary of a SharePoint site, yeah, your group is going to have all-up membership, but now you've got a bunch of breakaway permissions potentially in subsites or folders on that site, and you want to think carefully about, do you want that within that Teams environment? How does it play together? Or, one of the things we also think about is, historically we've had these giant SharePoint sites with lots of subsites and depth to them. The whole Teams model and the groups model is more about breadth, is have many SharePoint sites, many groups, many teams, and have focused memberships per, and bring them back together with other constructs like SharePoint hubs, for example, to say, how do these individual things fit together in a whole? But so taking that existing classic SharePoint site that may be fully nested, have a lot of complexity to it, you want to think about what that's going to mean in the Teams construct once I move it in, once it's connected.
Perfect. Awesome. Thank you. Let's go ahead and jump into kind of more of a tactical question. What are we getting the Join Online button on a meeting reminder for a Teams meeting? Now, I'm assuming that they're referring to Outlook. So yes. When we get that pop-up.
So it's enabled and it's working for us internally. I'm just assuming that we are in an internal ring, which is why our employees see it. I wouldn't doubt that it will be available to customers very soon if it's not already.
And for those that might not be familiar with how Microsoft internal does it, we have certain rings. And so once it goes out broadly to Microsoft, it means that it's actually coming to you pretty quickly thereafter, usually within weeks. So look for that Join Online button to come pretty soon. Let's see here. Can you comment on the effect on Teams data if a tenant is moved from the US to Europe? So again, talking maybe about data retention and how what happens if a tenant is moved from US to Europe.
Well, I think there's a nuance to that conversation, and I'll talk about what we do first, because obviously I think I can best talk about what we do internally. Is we have 4 regions within Microsoft for our files, certainly in Exchange for Exchange, and so we have a multi-geo tenancy. So we're in Europe, Asia, North America, and in fact we've got a couple regions within North America. But point being, we've got 4 regions, and we can therefore say that based on the user, their files, their SharePoint site behind every new team that's created is going to be in the appropriate region. So that's kind of point 1, that I can have a multi-geo Teams deployment. Then the next thing, actually moving the tenancy from region completely holistically, that's a question of where your primary region is. Do I want to move from country A over to country B, from Europe to Asia, for example? Then that really would be a model of I'm moving my entire Teams tenancy into that whole new region. And I can't speak to what the implications from a file management from a perspective would be, because Teams, of course, supports that scenario of tenant move, right? But we certainly internally we're practicing a model that we're multi-geo tenancy.
Perfect. Okay, let's go ahead and jump into there's a bunch of great questions here, so thank you guys for those and keep them coming. Have you addressed areas in Microsoft which have strict policies or requirements about message retention? How do you satisfy them while giving others wider access?
Fair question. I'll take a first stab at that one. So retention is one of those things that we're in progress of kind of working through it with Teams now, that we have, obviously with the 365, Office 365 Security and Compliance Center, there's the ability to apply retention labels and say these people and these teams, for example, have these retentions. And so we can do that. And that's kind of where we're starting from, is to say these people have, or these organizations, for example, therefore these people will have a following retention on their teams overall, their chats, their channels, and so on. We can define, or a specific team, for example, may have a specific retention, maybe it's in legal and has a certain, therefore, retention policy associated with it. That's where we're starting from. But as we go forward, this is, again, for us, an evolution, that we've got retention elsewhere in the suite today, and we're trying to think holistically. It's not just about the chats, but it's about the chats, the files, the other components, the email, because obviously if you have an employee who's communicating one way, you want that retention to be more of a holistic model. So that's why we go back to the Office Security and Compliance Center, and how do we configure it there with the labeling constructs and the ability to set our policy at an individual spot within the tenant.
The thing that I'll add to that, we had a separate session on this at Ignite as well, where we talked about, Teams is, again, an Office 365 service, right? It has that e-discovery, has all of those elements that you would apply just as you would either to a SharePoint or to Exchange, and so Teams actually supports those as well, which is really great. Speaking of kind of collaboration here, can you speak to the ease at which collaboration with external users, whether it's a customer or a client, for example, can participate in Teams?
Yep, so I think there are two aspects to this, and even we've found that our users as well sometimes find it confusing. There is one aspect where you are a Teams user and you want to chat or call a customer who may or may not be a Teams user, who could be a Skype for Business user. That is referred to traditionally as federation. So if you are a Teams user today in Teams only mode, and if you want to chat or call a customer who could be using Skype for Business on-prem, online, hybrid, on-prem, online, you have the ability to do that. Presence, chat, calls work from Teams, and they default straight to Skype for Business to your customer, unless they've upgraded themselves to Teams. The other aspect, which is completely different from federation, is you can create a team and you can add someone as a guest into your team, which is entirely different from you sending an IM to a customer directly, which is what Skype for Business did. Teams does that. In addition, we have the ability to have guests in our team so they can collaborate.
Yeah, that's right.
You go ahead.
Well, just emphasizing that communication, federation was designed for really more direct communication, whereas the guest model really suits the collaboration scenarios.
Yeah, and add to that, think of the guest model and guest sharing and ability to bring someone into a team. It's the same thing, again, suite-wide. If I were to do bring someone in as a member of a SharePoint site, member of the Outlook group, member of a team, that's actually the beauty of it. By bringing someone as a guest, a member of a team, they're a full-on member. And so we have examples of this internally where someone in Windows, for example, would be working with a chip manufacturer and wanting to have an interactive project, and they're literally working together as if it's one virtual team, cross-company. Great, let's go bring in that chip manufacturer as a member of a team and give them the ability to kind of work with that. And by default, the way we set it up with our tenancy is, and obviously, by the way, this is fully configurable that you decide, do you want guests allowed in or not? In our case, we do. We allow guests to become members in our teams, as well as we allow, except within certain situations. In our governance conversation, a separate series, a separate webinar here, we talk in more detail about how and when we enable external guest sharing.
Yeah, and even more importantly, it's up to the IT admin to decide if they bring the guests in, and also what the guests can do. So. Yep. To certain points, you might actually have a partner or a vendor, as an example, that you want to give more access to your team, rather than maybe just a participant that might be able to join and to contribute or to collaborate, but not in a more restricted manner.
Exactly, and that, as you said, IT can control that. We can say when we want someone to come in. We can say, do we want to whitelist who's allowed in? We can say who's allowed to bring someone in, and we can even say what teams are allowed to bring in guests.
And then the specific controls, more narrowly than that, would be determined by the team owner, right? So that's just kind of two levels of configurability. So you have flexibility both at making sure we're safe from an enterprise perspective, from the IT pro responsibility, as well as the flexibility to flex with those business needs, as you were saying, at the team level.
Perfect. Let's go on to a few other questions. There's a ton more coming in. These are all fantastic. How do you solve for, so this kind of goes back to readiness, how do you solve for multi-language needs of global customers for the awareness and training associated with new deployments?
Such a good question. When you have a deployment, this kind of size, 200,000 users, what we did was start with what's the content needed? What are our objectives? How are we going to measure success? We really made a plan around that. We developed it in one language locally for us in English, and then we got our people, our feet on the street in the very different areas, our IT managers, our area capabilities leads, to partner with us and to do localization and roll out in those areas. But really, still speaking with one voice and going through general information and usage, and then dropping down into different role-based information and usage, which is what we're doing today. So hopefully that answers it.
Yeah, and hopefully that's an example that can be replicable for many of our customers.
Yes.
Let's go here. There's some more tactical questions. Actually, we'll start with one before we get into some of the tactical ones. Does Teams have the full capabilities concerning meetings in the video conferencing like Skype for Business does?
Yes. So it does have all the features. So when it comes to audio conferencing and video conferencing, it has a lot more. You could blur your background, you could take notes, you could have a chat separately. There are a lot of things that are in addition to just audio and video conference. On top of that, our comparative numbers, when we see our meetings with Skype and Teams, we see higher HCI, higher meeting quality index, low poor call ratio. So the quality numbers, even within Microsoft, if we compare it with Skype, we seem to see improvement. The video experience is better. There are certain things that as a customer or as a user, you may still think that it's not available yet, and those are also being worked on. And I could give an example like, in Skype, you had the ability to manage your lobby. In Skype, you had the ability to manage who could be attendee presenter before you schedule the meeting. Those are also things that the product group is working on in order to incorporate into Teams as well. But apart from, as long as audio or video conferencing goes, Teams is comparable, and even the experience is much better in our experience with Skype.
I'd say that just even as a user, just the ability to on my phone join a meeting, and I know that I'm going to have a reliable connection. Or if you know what, my data plan is not great, Teams will say, "Do you want me to call you back?" Right? I love that capability right there in the client. That just makes it so that my experience works better as an employee with Teams than it ever did with Skype, especially on a mobile device.
Yeah. No, and actually to that point, as a marketer, one of my favorite things to demo in Teams outside of the collaboration aspect are meetings. And so like, and also to your point, like background blur, like there has been a ton of positive reception on background blur, and one of the things that we actually used to tackle, or one of the reasons we created that was we wanted people to be more present in their video. When we interviewed a lot of individuals, when they said, do you use your webcam or not? And if not, why? They said, well, I want it to be about me and not about my surroundings. I don't want people to be like, hey, you should really dust off the refrigerator behind you, or like, who's that person, or
what cafe are you working from?
Yeah, or like in the example of like the BBC reporter, right? When his son came in the background, or his toddler came in the background. And so meetings to me are super fun to demo, because there's a lot more that you can do with it. Within the Teams client, you can go full screen. When you look at like the mobile app as an example, there's a lot more AI that's kind of involved that detects, like, for example, you're on mute but you're talking, and it'll actually prompt you to say, hey, you're muted. So
I've used that. I've seen that before. It's like, oops, I forgot to unmute. And
from getting more out of it, I've actually had IT admins come up to me and say thank you, because their meetings in Skype for Business Online, actually, the bandwidth requirement was actually greater than with Teams. And so they're actually able to get more with less with Teams. And so I would absolutely agree with you on the fact that Teams does have a superior quality with regards to meetings, and also with video. And we do have all those back-end foundation components, such as audio conferencing and whatnot.
You know what else I would add to that is, beyond just the meeting happening, it's a full experience. It's before the meeting, you have a channel chat. You can chat, you can open a OneNote, you can work on the agenda together. Then you have your meeting with all those great experiences, and if you record it, post-meeting, there you go. Stream integrates with Teams. The recording is right there for you. The chat is persistent, and this is especially great when you have recurring meetings.
Yeah, great point on the recording. Yeah, that's definitely a great feature.
Perfect. Let's go ahead and jump into a few other ones. How do you manage the existing calendar events that already had a Skype meeting link when the user switches to Teams and no longer uses Skype?
Yeah. So the way it works today, and the guidance that we initially gave our users was, if you had a Skype for Business meeting scheduled previously, you don't have to cancel it. You don't actually have to change it, because even if you are upgraded to Teams, all your previous meetings are still valid. Whoever you sent that meeting to, whether they have been upgraded to Teams or not, they can still join that meeting. You can still join that meeting. So what you could do if it is easier for you is every meeting that you've scheduled already, you can keep them. Going forward, schedule Teams meeting, and eventually your Skype meetings will phase out. However, a lot of users have asked, no, we don't want that. We actually want to create Teams meeting. And initially, the only way to do that was you cancel the Skype for Business meeting and you create a new Teams meeting in its place. However, now, internally, what we are starting to see is we've rolled out a new feature where if you wanted to change your Skype for Business meeting into Teams, you could do that by just a click of a button. And I think we demoed that at Ignite as well. Yeah.
Yeah. For those that may not have been aware of that, it's as easy as simply opening up the Outlook calendar invite and clicking Teams meeting, and it'll ask you if you want to update the coordinates. It sends it out to all your users, and it's now become a Teams user or Teams meeting.
Teams meeting.
And if it's a recurring meeting, it actually will update the series, which is awesome. Okay, let's go ahead and jump into a few others here. Is the tool necessary to migrate files from Teams into a site in SharePoint? I think, David, you kind of touched on this earlier, but maybe...
Well, yeah, because every Teams has SharePoint behind the scenes. So from a migration perspective, yeah, when you're to migrate into Teams, if you already have an existing SharePoint, then just teamify that existing SharePoint to make it team connected.
Perfect. Speaking of SharePoint, what does Teams mean for SharePoint Online? Is SharePoint becoming more of a behind the scenes? And is the strategy from Microsoft for folks to go to Teams first for their work and collaboration?
So I'd say it depends on the scenario. Because if I'm chatting with my team, I'm going to start in Microsoft Teams, and therefore if a files experience that SharePoint provides is going to be in Teams because I'm there, right? Just like if I'm in Yammer and want to have a conversation in Yammer, great, I can do that, and files again are in that SharePoint site. So in that sense, yes, SharePoint's behind the experience. On the other side, from a content management and collaboration perspective, SharePoint has the portal richness that if I choose to go to a portal, go to the site, absolutely go to the site, work there, work for SharePoint client, the offline OneDrive for Business, the ability to sync my files, like all the other capabilities are all there. Fundamentally though, it's about saying, look, SharePoint is, the files are meant to be where you're working on them in context. So yes, SharePoint's going to provide that in addition to the SharePoint experiences you already have. In fact, some of the other SharePoint things, like for example news and other things that you'd see directly in that SharePoint team site, can also be surfaced directly in that team. So I don't have to go to that SharePoint site. But people will, because obviously there's going to be a lot of scenarios where I'm using the SharePoint app, for example, or just directly in a web browser, navigate to a SharePoint site. I want to find what's going on. I want to see my business process. I want to use my Power Apps. Great, go to the SharePoint site. I want to just, but if I'm working on those files in context, I'm working on them in Teams.
It's also about thinking about who the audience is. SharePoint is brilliant for intranets and for broad audience information. And Teams is where I work on my day-to-day stuff with people across groups. So it's something to consider too.
Yeah, no, that's actually a really great point. Yeah. I just had a conversation with a customer yesterday where they were talking about SharePoint as an intranet site versus a repository. And so the conversation was specifically related to Teams, and Teams is replacing SharePoint, and I was like, actually, it can do both. And so if we think about the customization and the extensibility behind Teams, you're able to add into channels tabs, and so you can actually, I've seen a lot of customers actually bring in tabs from SharePoint intranet sites into a particular team to be able to take advantage of those previously accessed sites. And so I think that the long story short with the strategy behind SharePoint is that it's a super important asset in our Office 365 arsenal, and that Teams is actually taking advantage of some of the best parts of it.
Right. In the same way that you think of Teams in Planner or Teams in the calendar and Outlook, yes, I could go to the other experiences to go to Planner directly, or I can just work directly in Teams.
Exactly. Perfect. Let's go ahead and go back to some of the Microsoft readiness and how we actually kind of got our users on that journey from Skype to Teams. How do you know when Microsoft internal users are ready to make that switch fully to Teams?
I love that. I love that question. That's actually the question we started with. For us, we, as we mentioned, we're moving our communications from Skype fully into Teams. So the question was that simple. How do we know when they're ready? And we created measurements and metrics around chat, meeting, calling, some key communications functions so that we could measure what was happening with our audiences. 1. 2, we then created measurements around our readiness, our training, our champions program, other things of that nature, both in a metric sense and in a feedback sense, so that we could see if what we were doing was actually moving the needle. And we looked particularly at those functions, because when you look at the all-up reporting, you could have somebody who has adopted Teams for all of their file sharing or different kinds of things, but may still be using Skype for Business for some of those key communication functions. So to look at it, holistically, it may look like there's high adoption, but if you're us and you're taking away the communications platform and replacing it, you need to understand if they're using some of those particular functions. So we were able to drill down and see if that, 1, we were moving the needle in what we were offering, and 2, if people were making that move. And fortunately, they are.
That's great.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but you're also doing this organizationally based. Like you're saying, this org is more ready first.
That's right. We have ways to look at it, starting from the EVP on down through the orgs, to understand where they're at. To really, we have folks from our group aligned to these orgs so that we can get the feedback and find out what may be unique to their situation, and if there are blockers to adoption for them, so we can work through it.
And would you say, Sarah, that we got it all right the first time?
100%.
Of course we did. No, it's definitely an iterative process, absolutely. And we've had some great learnings along the way, and I feel like our journey is really well underway.
Well, and I think a best example in terms of how we do it and how a lot of our customers look to Microsoft, when I talk to customers and they're asking me specifically about how should I go about adopting this, or how do we think about this? And it goes back to a lot of the materials that we provided on our docs pages from our Skype to Teams. You typically start with one group or one division as an example. And I know coming from marketing, we were one of the first. It's like, let's actually get these folks using the product. Let's iterate from them. Let's understand what went well, what didn't go so well. So that way, when you kind of get more into those critical parts of your company, the last thing you want to do is get your sales force onto a product that may not be just quite ready, or you might not have honed those the skills needed for them to take advantage of. And so that's actually been kind of our staged approach. Let's look at how do we qualify it, verify it, iterate, and then repeat.
Exactly. Yep.
Yes. Perfect. And you guys have done a great job. It's been great from the outside looking in, at least from a marketing perspective. Along those lines, once a user is in Teams only mode, should that user be able to receive a screen share from someone in Skype for Business?
Yes. So the latest update on Skype for Business side, which comes through Office, enables that. The way the product team is envisioning this and the way it would work going forward as well is, today if you are using Skype for Business, and if you want to share your screen with me and I am a Teams user, there are 2 ways in which this could work. Method 1 is, even though I am a Teams user, I could still have a reduced Skype for Business client installed on my computer, and I could be signed into it. I won't be able to use it for chat and calls, but I could use it for other modalities. So if I'm a Teams user, I am signed into Skype for Business. If someone sends a screen share with me in Skype for Business, I would see a pop-up in my Skype for Business in my computer saying someone is trying to share their screen with me. And I click on that pop-up, my Skype for Business client will launch, and I will be able to see their screen share. If I am a user who never logs into Skype for Business because I don't need to anymore, I have Teams, right? In that case, when a Skype for Business user tries to share their screen with me, we call that a meeting escalation scenario. So what basically happens is, as soon as the Skype for Business user tries to share a screen with me and I'm a Teams user, a meeting is created automatically on the Skype for Business user's end, and a meeting link is sent to me in my Teams client. I have to click on the meeting link, and when I do that, it launches my Skype for Business client, and I am now in a meeting with the initiator using my Skype, and then we can do screen share. The similar way is envisioned to work from the Teams side as well, but that's not yet developed and it's not available. What will happen is if you're a Teams user and if you want to share a screen with a Skype for Business user, the envisioning is we would send a meeting link, which would this time be a Teams meeting, to the Skype for Business user, who can then click on the Skype for Business meeting and join a Teams meeting and see my screen share. Natively between Teams and Skype for Business, you won't be able to do screen share directly. It would happen through one client, and we're making it easy by creating an automated meeting anytime a user attempts that. So.
Perfect. Okay, let's go ahead and move on to the next one. How and with what tools do you manage the beast that teams can become with any employee being able to create a team? Specifically, we're worried about discovery for users and storage on the admin side as the numbers potentially grow.
Yeah, and I'd say this is actually...
We never have that problem.
Yeah, we never have. So I'd say, look, it's the same thing as on the SharePoint side, because at the end of the day, you're enabling your employees to create a thing. And we had a whole webinar in the series that you can go watch with details exactly this, of how do we enable this. And in a nutshell, though, we've got the ability to say every group has an accountable owner. Every owner must be a full-time employee of a group. In fact, those are the only people allowed to create a new team. We then do Azure Lifecycle Management, because the Azure AD has a lifecycle management capability to do cleanup. Therefore, every team and every SharePoint can get cleaned up and have a lifecycle to it. Every 180 days as a team owner, I get notified that I need to go take action. And in fact, right within the Teams client, I see the UI that shows me, yep, your team is about to expire in 30 days, go do something about it. Click here if you want to renew. So one of the things we find is we do have turnover of our teams because, project ends, the team is no longer using it, no longer needs it, no longer cares about it, it's not under legal retention, so yes, it gets cleaned up. And the Azure AD capabilities, which do this across the suite, are already handling teams just like they will modern groups, modern Outlook connected groups for SharePoint, Outlook, Planner, Stream, the rest of the set.
I would add, too, that it's an important part of the communication aspect, what you expect of people to do, training them when to use a one-to-many chat versus actually create a brand new team. Some things of that nature just to get people familiar with best practices and avoid too many teams.
No, exactly.
And then there was another question along the similar lines around capabilities in terms of being able to archive a group.
Yeah.
Like how should IT admins be thinking about teams today, and do we provide capabilities for them to be able to archive that group in order to kind of keep down that clutter, as an example of the number of teams the user might participate
Well, and I think there's, again, a couple parts of it. Is one, there is now the ability to archive a team, and we're not really broadly using that internally yet, but that is one of the things we're looking at a little more as to what that implications that are, as well as, of course, when does it make sense just to put something on retention and say, I want to keep this read-only team for a period of time. And it's kind of that archive story, but an ongoing, I want to keep it because it's now a reference for content. It should be there for ongoing future projects reference.
Perfect. Keep the questions coming. There's a bunch here. Let's actually kind of get into some of the tactical elements as it relates to licensing, as an example. One that just came through, can we use the Office 365 phone system license on both Skype for Business and Teams, or how do we migrate them to Teams from Skype for Business?
Yep. So if you have a phone system license, I would imagine you also have calling plans, which means you are homed in Skype for Business online and use PSTN calling. That's the exact same plan that is required if you want to switch over to Teams. So if you actually want to upgrade to Teams, all you do is upgrade that user from Skype to Teams, and the same calling plan and the same phone license would then be working with Teams, and they could make PSTN call from Teams. The one aspect that you may want to consider is if you are not using calling plans, if you are using Skype for Business Online with on-premise Skype for Business server and hybrid voice, you won't be able to make a call from Teams using your hybrid on-prem Skype for Business server. And the solution for that is if you are in a country or a region which does not offer PSTN calling or phone system or calling plans in Office 365, you could use Teams with direct routing. So you could buy telephone lines from a local telecom operator in that country region, connect it to a session border controller, and that way you could configure the session border controller to go straight to Teams in Office 365. And that is what we are doing as well. So every employee in our company uses PSTN calling. We obviously don't offer PSTN calling in every country where we exist. So our solution is a combination of direct routing and cloud voice phone system and calling plans.
Perfect. Again, along the same lines, when you add a guest to a team, does the guest need to have a Teams account through the organization? What functionality does a Teams guest not have in Teams versus if it were a full member account in Teams?
It's not required for a Teams guest to have an Office 365 business or school account. They can just use any email address that they associate then with as a Microsoft account. I can register my account in that way, and then I can participate in the team. And I think from the perspective of what that experience is, we talked earlier about some of the limitations around, if I am a guest, I may not be able to create a new team and do certain things within a team. Those all would apply. The other thing is, as a guest, I don't have this concept of my own tenant and then a separate tenant. I am just entering the environment where I've been invited, and it's pretty seamless in that way. Whereas if I have an Office 365 account, as I do with Microsoft, and I'm invited to somebody else, then I just have to make sure that I am sort of switching contexts for where I want to work.
The other thing is a guest can't manage a team in any way, just like a member not necessarily can't, depending on Teams configuration. But the guest is invited in, and the owner can approve and say these are new guests, but a guest can't then say, I want to bring more people into this team.
Yep.
Perfect. Next question. Do I have to schedule a meeting to start a video chat?
No. So if video call is what you would like to do, you should be able to do a peer-to-peer audio call and add video to it. I'm pretty sure, I don't remember right now, but I have seen it working. I have used it. So you don't have to start a meeting for a video call.
Yeah, you can do it right from a chat. You can do it, yeah.
Yeah.
Perfect. The other thing that I actually haven't seen here, but I may be coming down is can you escalate from a one-to-one chat to a screen share in Teams? So and we actually did preview this at Ignite, and that is coming. That'll be coming very soon.
Yeah, I love that. I've already seen that on the ring I'm in. You love being able to have a chat and go, okay, but let's share your screen right
let's
there.
Take action.
Look at this.
Yes. When can we expect shared calendar support and the ability to pop out the chat window in Teams? I know
It's kind of two different questions.
it's kind of two different. Let's start with when can we expect shared calendar support in Teams?
Well, since the team already has a calendar behind it, every team has that group, has that Outlook calendar that already exists. I think that's true today. It's just not necessarily represented in Teams UI yet, right?
Correct.
So let's cover that part. And then the other part was the
Multi-window.
The multi-window, that actually continues to be the most number one asked for feature.
I mean, it is by far the most requested feature, even from our internal users and from the customers. And it's not that I think the product team does not want to do it. The way the Teams architecture was built, it requires a complete change in the North Star view of what the product team wanted to do if they want to do multiple windows. So it's definitely something that the product group is working on, is what I know. We don't have dates or ETA on when it will happen, but that feedback has been heard by everyone. So
I would just add that our own users have found a workaround to that problem. Often I'll hear about, and I've done this myself, I'll be working in Teams and there's a client, and then I'll have a web browser, which is really a separate session, and then I can actually monitor what's going on in one part of Teams or one conversation, and then be participating in another. So,
Some even the mobile client.
just have browser windows open, yeah.
Yeah.
You're so smart.
Any best practices for Teams meeting notes in case they have to be shared for people joining voice using phone? What are the options to email Teams meeting notes?
You can create OneNote is integrated into the Teams meeting experience. So you can create those notes real time. You can collaborate from different people in the meeting on those notes real time. And you can take that link, that OneNote link, and email it if you want to use email to talk about that. Also, as I mentioned, the great thing is it literally brings up a Teams chat which is persistent. So if they're doing a dial-in or something like that, they can later go look at that chat and they have access to all the meeting notes without anybody having to email anybody.
Not to mention, if the meeting's recorded, you also get a transcript. Right?
That's right.
Absolutely. Next question. Teams needs to be more modular nature. One notable problem that's hard to work around is trying to work on items or notes in the team itself while having the video meeting in a separate window or screen. Are there any plans to work on this? And I believe this actually kind of goes back to
Multiple
the idea
windows,
of the
yeah.
multiple window.
Yeah.
Next one. There are 3 default tabs in Teams. Can they be changed, removed, or customly configured in any way?
That's a great question. We get that question a lot in training. The 3 tabs are Conversations, Wiki, and Files. Actually, not quite in that order. The Wiki can be removed. Conversations and Files are static, and then you can add from there the different kinds of tabs that you would like to have in your channels.
Right. In fact, adding a new tab is something that we're seeing opportunities for now, like adding a new tab because I want to have a site. Maybe I want to do, for example, Azure DevOps integration into my team because I want to be able to discuss bugs or issues going on in Azure DevOps. I want to be able to see them right there in the experience. So there's a lot of opportunities for just adding additional tabs.
That's right.
Perfect. Actually, this one might be a great one for the group. How do we use Teams to help with collaboration without creating duplicates of the same file when the file may be relevant to multiple channels?
So what I would say is that SharePoint site behind a team is also there. Of course, it's SharePoint go there directly. If I'm using that team in Outlook and there's a mail, I'm having a mail conversation about that, that's exactly the same SharePoint site again. The planner, same thing again. Stream, same. It's all the same SharePoint site underneath the seams behind all these connected workloads. So therefore, if I want to have a file in SharePoint that I'm having this conversation about in Teams, that's also available from those other experiences. Plus, of course, the beauty of the file being in SharePoint, I can easily share a link to that file in any of those other experiences too. So even if I'm not against directly that SharePoint site, maybe I want to take that link and send it via email. I can take it out of Teams, copy the link in the SharePoint share dialog, and just say I want to share this link, and put it in an email, and nice and simple.
And in the Teams experience itself, generally we talk about thinking about how we set up our channels and where people can be expected to find certain things because everybody does have access to all the channels in a team. But I will also mention, to David's point about it being SharePoint, you could literally pin that SharePoint link to the top of every single channel.
Yes, that's actually a really great reminder. We were actually coming down to the last few minutes, so let's get through a few more questions, and then we'll be able to extend this with the poster webinar with the ones that we didn't get to today. Will Teams evolve to have a broadcast element and replace Skype meeting broadcasts?
Yeah.
Yes.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Yeah. So yes, the broadcast experience is coming to Teams. It's available for us in preview. I don't know if it's available to customers yet. It might be, but it's going to be much simpler. In Skype, you had to go to a web page in order to schedule your broadcast. In Teams, when you go to the Meetings tab, you will now have a drop-down box, and you can just select, instead of a Teams meeting, you want a broadcast meeting, and that's it.
Yeah, and it should be live for customers. It is in preview, but it's in a public preview, and they're called Teams Live Events. So if you haven't actually had a chance to play around with Teams Live Events, to Anas's point, the discoverability and management of that online broadcast is pretty simple, and you can find that in Teams.
Yeah, and you can see that live event also in Stream. If you want to have an outer loop conversation about that in Yammer, you can see again that, again, these things all interconnect.
Yes, absolutely. And then one other one here. Is there a way to assign a new user to all the teams or to any team based on an existing user's membership?
So having a security group way to drive team membership doesn't exist today in product. We have often the ability to add directly. We'll have scripts, for example, which manage membership and add people to explicit groups. Over time, I know one of the things the product is looking at is what would it mean to drive membership of a team based on some security group that doesn't exist yet. So today it's about how do I add, because of course every member in the Azure AD behind that team, you can manage that membership programmatically already today.
Perfect. We'll end with one more. Will Microsoft Skype room systems be changing into Microsoft Teams room system, or will there be a Teams room system? It's not that the Skype room system doesn't work for Teams more, it's that it's limited in functionality in comparison to Skype meetings.
Yeah, so that's actually a good marketing question, because we should find a way to name these rooms something other than Skype room systems, because they are supporting Teams today. Yeah. There are two types of Skype room systems, Skype room system version 1 and Skype room system version 2. Skype room system version 2 fully supports Teams meetings. You could do everything that you had the ability to do with Skype for Business. You have one-touch join available on them. It requires a software upgrade. There is no hardware change that you have to make. Same is the case with Surface Hubs. Skype Room System version 1, which was also known as LRS long time ago, we are also working on making sure that will work with Teams meetings as well, and that's in development. We have some rooms within our company where we are testing it, but it should also be available very soon to customers. So it does fully support Teams meetings. It is still named Skype Room System, so we may have to find a better name now to amalgamate the two.
Awesome. Well, great points, and thank you to everyone who's joined us today. The on-demand version of the roundtable will be posted soon to microsoft.com/IT-showcase, where you can also find related content, such as case studies, blogs, and upcoming events. Please join us for future webinars and bring your colleagues with you. Thank you. Hello again, and welcome to the extended Q&A session for the IT Expert Roundtable, Modern Collaboration with Microsoft Teams. We received many great questions during our webinar and wanted to make sure that we addressed as many of those questions as possible. Let's get started. Continuing on, how will one-on-one conversations be kept personal in Teams? Does Teams keep conversations between individuals confidential?
Yes, as much as any of the other workloads would. I mean, at the end of the day, yes, the only people who have access to that conversation are those participants in the group chat. Obviously, as the enterprise admin, as the e-discovery manager for the company, you have access to what you need to from a company definition perspective. But yeah, that chat is private as email or any other communication would be.
And as opposed to channel conversations, that's hosted in your OneDrive versus the SharePoint, correct?
Right, yeah, exactly. Your files, your individual chat files are stored in the OneDrive of the person sharing them.
Perfect. How do I know if I'm running the free version or the paid-for version of Teams? My company's licensed for Teams, but I suspect I'm using the free version.
Yeah, I think we talked about it. The free version doesn't have certain capabilities like calling meeting, but as far as I could say, if you are signing into your company's account into a Teams client, you are very likely using the actual version and not the free version, because my understanding is the clients are the same. It's the features that change based on what license and account you use.
Like you said, for example, meetings aren't a part of the free version.
Right.
Will email eventually be integrated into the Teams client?
That's a great question. One thing that I don't know that everybody knows, and it's something that's a bit of a delighter when we do our trainings, is that every channel inside a team has its own email address. So you can actually capture that, use that in CC or even in the two-line in an email, and I recommend, hey, let's move this conversation to Teams. You send it, and the email will show up in the channel feed of that team. Then, if anybody does respond in email to that, so long as they keep everybody that was on, the two-line, all the aliases in there, that conversation will continue to thread in that channel. So it's one way we get people to actually kind of move the conversation real time and quickly into Teams, where we can quickly add people to the conversation, mention them, and avoid that kind of forking and threading that we can get.
Absolutely. In fact, that's actually been a delighter for a lot of customers, as you mentioned, in terms of helping them with that adoption to get people off of email over to Teams. And also, like from an archiving perspective, that email message is actually then captured in that channel within Teams as an actual file. So if you need to reference that later, you definitely can do so. What have been the bigger issues you've faced driving adoption? How have you moved people from basic to more advanced use of Teams features?
Yeah, that's a great question. You know, people run the gamut. Some people are really comfortable with what they've got going. You know, anytime we change something, there's a little bit of a productivity ramp where things kind of get a little bit less productive while we learn, and then we get into that new format. What's been really important from a readiness standpoint is to get people some of those quick wins. We have a short video, we cover it in every training that says top 5 things to do in Teams. You go in, you set up your notifications so that you don't miss anything. You orient somebody to how and where things are in the team itself. And it's funny because I've seen it time and again, after training people on some of these simple things, they're like, okay, I feel a little bit more comfortable. Now I'm gonna go play around with it a little bit and I can engage easily. So really, telling people it's going to be okay, showing them those quick wins and easy ways to use and set up Teams so that you can turn down the noise and not miss anything, makes people a little bit more comfortable.
The other thing that I've heard about from folks is that as they're implementing Teams and within the organization, they might actually just start with Collab, especially if they're using Skype for Business, and so they might continue to have like their instant message and their meetings in Skype, but they might be using Teams for group collaboration.
Mm-hmm. You make such a great point. All of these things in Teams, and this is what I usually tell folks, these are all the things you already know how to do and use in one place.
Yes.
So let me show you where they are, and then you're off and running. Yeah, absolutely. Starting with collaboration, document sharing, using those channel conversations, and being able to co-auth in that one space is a great way in.
And then you actually might see more of an organic growth
Yeah.
of like those communications features that
Exactly.
people are familiar with from Skype as they make their way into Teams.
Very true.
Here's another one related to SharePoint. Links to documents generated from Teams can be too large. When is it going to be unified with SharePoint format due to the limitation in the number of characters? Some functions such as rename, etc., fail in Teams due to the length of the URLs.
One, I'd say the thing that's coming to Teams that I think we like too is that share dialogue that you see in the rest of Office, the Office clients and SharePoint itself, is coming into Teams too. So it'll be that same set of experiences for how sharing works and what it's going to generate are going to be consistent across the suite, and I think that's one of the nice things.
And speaking of files, what is the feature of the Files tab? There's some confusion between that and SharePoint. We find we need to put a tab to SharePoint.
When I'd say part of it is, look, if I've got a Teams, I've got a SharePoint behind it, and if I'm using the same SharePoint behind the Teams, then everything is going to be there and under the folder structure of its per channel. If I want to then see a same experience, this is where the other thing that's coming is the ability to have that same SharePoint document library UI where I could have customized for columns, for example. Maybe I color code to show something's due soon, for example. I can do that in SharePoint. That same experience will show up in Teams. And so there's not going to be any disconnect between seeing the file management in SharePoint and working in the Teams experience. And if I want to bring something from a different say SharePoint site into my team, then I can obviously bring in another tab for that and show another SharePoint set of files in there if I want.
Perfect. Moving on to, let's talk about like the Teams Admin Center. Will there be reports or analytics in the Teams Admin Center?
I think they exist already. I don't know what depth the question is about, but there should be basic comparative reports for PCR and meeting index, etc.
There are, and in the Office 365 Content Admin Pack, you can get your Power BI reporting for Teams.
In fact, that's actually one of the beautiful things we have now. It's a whole all-up content pack for 365 that we can share within our own team. That we can say, here's what's going on across the suite. You've got your team's information right there.
Yep.
And one of the things that I actually learned at Ignite in terms of one of the presentations that a colleague had done was the granular level of like calling data, for example. Like we've all had issues with customers or even with ourselves where we might have had a negative call experience using Skype for Business or Microsoft Teams as an example. If you're using phone system, you can actually log into the Teams Admin Center and you can not only look at the call that was made, but it actually shows you the devices that were used on both sides especially like if it was a peer-to-peer call or if it was a PSTN call, it'll show you that. But it actually gives you way more information than you would ever think to consider to help you troubleshoot. And it even gives you kind of a mini dashboard, if you will, in terms of kind of like a meter that might actually call out. This user has had 60% calls that have been less than optimal, or they've been considered poor. And you can double click on that and you can see that, oh, maybe they're not using a certified Skype for Business or a certified Teams device to actually be able to help you be more explicit, or it might show you that they were on a public Wi-Fi. So the amount of granular level information available in Teams in the Admin Center is actually pretty big. So if you haven't taken a look at it yet, I encourage you to do so. There's a ton of information that's available in there. Moving on. It seems I've never been able to connect to Skype for Business from public computers. I'm not sure what this means here, but their question is, will I be able to access my Teams account on a public system?
So I think, let me start with, it depends on the tenancy configuration, because at the end of the day, the enterprise or your organization that you're connecting to has to make some decisions as to what you're allowed to do. Because like within Microsoft, we have conditional access policies that basically say you can only see Teams, a full Teams experience, from a trusted enrolled device. In other words, what we don't want is data that's potentially leaving our company that on a device we can't trust. So within our own tenancy, that's one of our configurations. So you can't necessarily join from grandma's machine because it's not an enrolled device. That said, I can call into a call meeting, I can join a meeting, I just can't get into a full Teams experience and see files in that untrusted device. And then again, it's an enterprise per company decision, effectively.
Yeah, and I'll add to that. I've actually I've had customers experience that they've appreciated the fact that they could just go to teams.microsoft.com in an in-private browser that kind of gives them that Teams environment. But to your point, if that's not set up, it doesn't work. But then, I personally have done it before on a borrowed laptop with a colleague, and using multi-factor authentication, it actually verified that I was actually the right user.
Exactly.
So whether or not you choose to lock it down completely or you choose to have some level in between, we do provide a lot of customization opportunities for IT admins in order to make that work for their organization. Next question. If you've paid for a subscription to Office 365, do your files stay there as long as you pay for your subscription?
So from a lifecycle management perspective, it depends on the organization. And I mentioned earlier the delete in the chat, the delete capability, but we've got lifecycle management. The organization can say this group must be renewed after a period of time, and so the files will be there as long as a team is there. And so if a team gets deleted because maybe lifecycle management's deleting it because no one's actively renewing it, at that point it could go away. At least that's the one way in our tenancy. If there's no delete and if there's no cleanup on your tenancy, then the team will be there as long as the tenant admin lets it stay there, as long as you're paying for a subscription.
Perfect. And also goes down to those alerts, right? The owners of teams will receive those alerts. And
Exactly.
it's important that those take action.
Exactly. In fact, that's the way the lifecycle management works, is the owner of a team will get that notification directly in the team's experience, just like any other message to say, hey, you have action required. You need to renew this thing.
And in fact, all owners of the team get the notification.
Exactly.
I've appreciated the fact that when we first started, all those emails came to me through email, or those notifications came through email.
Yeah.
Now I actually see them in the app, and I'm able just to click, and it just does the little background task, and it renews it, which is awesome.
Exactly.
Perfect. And then here, does Teams currently support Skype call queues? If not, when is it expected to be implemented?
Yep. So Teams does support Skype call queues, and call queues is basically your online Skype for Business online response group comparable solution. Another thing that we're working on, which would be very helpful to customers and even us internally, is we're also working on the ability to have on-premise telephone numbers supported with call queues. So if you are in a country region where you can't use call queues because you don't have numbers available there, you may be able to use an on-premise telephone number, so it'll help your transition from response groups, etc., to call queues with Teams. And when you have call queues, it supports both Teams and Skype, so you could have both types of users part of the call queue, some in Skype, some in Teams. It doesn't have to be either or.
Perfect. We have a few extra minutes for some additional questions. Any plans to allow users to modify the side panel menu? Apps often get lost in those 3 dots at the bottom of the navigation window.
Well, certainly there's an extensibility model across Teams that enables us to either build tabs or add things directly and pin things directly to the left rail, for example. So there's definitely already an extensibility model. As far as the 3 dots are concerned, the product is working on the ability to then add to that. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, and actually at Ignite we announced there's an app policy coming to Teams that will allow an IT admin to be able to show or hide those actual main navigation tabs as they are in the navigation panel.
Right, and one of the nice things about Teams and the catalog management is, as IT, I can say, these are the approved apps that the company, the tenancy is going to allow against our service and put in the catalog.
Perfect. Let's actually kind of go back to maybe some guidance on how we've, at Microsoft, how we look at adopting Teams and more importantly using Teams. The question here is, what guidance do you give people about when to create a new team versus using an existing one? I know I get that one quite a bit.
Yeah, it's one of the things that comes up in training quite a bit. And while we have the flexibility for people to do whatever they need, one of the concepts that we do share is it's often more in the spirit of openness and transparency when you take a larger set of people that you're working with on a related set of stuff and put them into one team. As long as that team, has the right security boundary and the appropriate people to be, have access to all that information, you'll find there's more cross communication across your projects, initiatives, and so on when you have that larger set. So it's opportunistically, in my view, more advantageous.
Perfect. And along those same lines, are there any, when you think about like Teams sprawl as an example, I mean, when we think about, like, what are some considerations you think that as people are setting out to adopt Teams for their organization, like what boundaries, do you think they could actually give to their users? Because it's always like, do I create a new team or a new channel? And like, do we have any best practices?
Well, there's a couple of concepts that we've talked about, I think, in some of our other seminars or webinars. One is making sure it's the right set of people, the appropriate audience who can have access to information. The second thing is that you're discussing the right or relevant information, right? If a third of my audience doesn't care about this new thing I'm about to add in, I should think twice about whether to do that or whether to do that in a separate set of channels, right? Be conscientious of what I'm introducing there. The third thing is, am I able to elevate and include the people who need access to information? Maybe not the people who I'm working with on a day-to-day basis, but we've got some upper management people who are checking in, and sometimes we'll give those people access, but we really anticipate that they'll be following a specific channel or a specific set of conversations, or maybe even just looking at news updates that we might publish to our SharePoint site. So that's the other sort of level of sort of the questions that one asks. So did I leave anything out?
I would just say that you want to look at moving business process.
Yeah.
Lifting the whole thing up, moving the whole thing over, and then teaching people where things are. So it's also about longevity. A team should be a long-lived thing, whereas maybe a one-to-many chat is for a shorter, quicker project because you still have the capabilities for file sharing and adding new members, things of that nature. So kind of that business process, and also generally we say more channels, fewer teams.
That's actually a great point.
And I think what we, again, it goes back to the altitude conversation, because we think about, the other group workloads, we think about like SharePoint, we think about broad, we want to create more, we want to hubify, bring them together to say, we've got these divisional things, they're all independent, in the independent teams, and we bring them back together again there in the SharePoint workload, for example.
Well, awesome. Well, thank you, David, Sarah, Frank, and Anas, and many thanks to our audience for the great questions. We hope you found this session helpful. Remember to check out Microsoft.com/IT Showcase for more webinars, case studies, white papers, and blogs. Thank you.